She's a sweetie.
I can see her right here. She's right there already.
The tab on the last one comes up on Explorer as a presentation title goes here.
Yeah. It's funny when it works that way.
I'm sorry.
Oh, man.
That is going to be so fun. I think we can go next year.
It was a lot of fun.
Guess what?
I can't go this year.
I'm not on mommy duty this year.
No, they're not going. Their school's not going. Oh, so good for you.
They were there last year. Were you there on mommy duty?
I was.
Oh, I remember. You came up to the.
It was so much fun.
Yeah.
But I can't go this year.
I know it is.
We did a lot of walking last year.
Yes.
Well, we didn't. I didn't.
You should have some.
No, don't give Bill any. Were you walking around? You have to get it from Melissa directly, like a handshake.
All right.
Are you missing handouts?
No, he's missing yellow cards.
Actually, Tamani, I do need a copy of the handout.
Oh, sorry.
For a while.
All right, I believe we're ready to call the work session to order. And we begin with work on calendars.
Our favorite.
On that note.
I just want to say thank you very much.
I was going to say, before we go to that note, thank you to Calendar Committee for all the work that you do. It's a heavy lift, and we appreciate it.
And if it was easy.
And you probably had an extra big day today with magnets going out.
We should have better scheduled having her in front of us.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Getting it all done today.
Because our email box is overflowing.
Chair Martin, members of the board, we do come to you today with two items that we're about calendars, and we can feel the excitement you have for this topic. We look forward to engaging in conversation. The first one is the 1920 calendar for some select schools like the academies and some other schools specifically that would adhere to that calendar. That one you're going to find is probably pretty straightforward as Tamani walks you through that one. The second set of calendars are for the 2020-21 instructional year, and that will be for the traditional, multi-track, and modified. We're going to start first with the 1920. Tamani, as you've already noted, works very closely with the calendar committee. You know the committee is made up of many representatives, both from the community as well as the school system, central services as well as school-based. So we try to use their input a lot in drafting these calendars, and she's going to walk you through not only what the legislation requires us to do with regard to a calendar, but the input in trying to determine the various teacher work days, start date, end date, etc. Tamani?
So if we'll focus first on the easier calendars, you have 4 calendars stapled together. Fox, it'll have Fox's draft on the front. Looks like this one. So these are our support model calendars and the early college calendars. You'll see that each of these calendars, well, you'll know that they each have 177 student days to align with the 1920 calendars that have already been approved. They each have September 30th as a district-wide teacher workday. Since we have moved to 177 student days, there are 17 teacher workdays, there are 11 holidays, and there are 10 annual leave or vacation days. You will also notice at the bottom for weather makeup, we have interspersed a day or two with banked hours as we did on the other 1920 calendar.
Very simplified.
So the first one is Fox, and as a support model school, they have more flexibility in their calendar. They start and end the same time as traditional, but they have some flexibility within the calendar on where they want teacher work days. Barwell, you can flip to the next page.
Tamani, before we go on that, on the banked hours, I appreciate that they're sort of dispersed. Am I right that if they're not used, then they roll forward?
That's at your discretion.
Okay.
Yes.
So they could roll forward and displace one of the other dates.
I don't know that you as a board have decided kind of by practice, if that's exactly what you want to do, I think that's what could happen.
Could happen. Yeah.
But I don't know that you've said, yes, that is how we want to use
Strikes me that's a decision that could be made at the time should there be more of an event, but could roll forward. Yeah.
If we don't use them when they're first noted on the calendar, we would continue to possibly access them as needed and as we experience inclement weather through the year.
If we don't use a scheduled date, that date is gone.
Correct.
If we don't use a bank day,
Those hours remain available.
Right.
Yes.
Correct.
Remain available to us.
That's correct.
I'm done. I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
So if you'll flip over to the Barwell Walnut Creek calendar, that calendar, unlike Fox, is based on the Track 4 calendar, or starts with following kind of the Track 4 calendar. So you'll see that the first day of school is earlier because they were Track 4 schools. So you'll notice that their first day is July 25th, and their first 2 days are early dismissal days. So the students come half day in the morning, and then parents, or they can do other work in the afternoon, and then students start full days the next week, which is the 29th. They have about the same track out time. They have 3 weeks of track out in October, some track out time in January, and some track out time in April. But they get out 2 days early, July 26th. So this is the support model where they have flexibility with their calendar. Yes, sir?
Would it make sense to add a T to your legend?
Tell me where and I will add it.
Well, you got 3 weeks of T's. The T's not in the legend.
Oh, yes, I will do that. I didn't realize that. Thank you.
Okay.
Because I could take out early release and add track out there. Thank you.
And actually, you have early release on the Fox one, and they don't have any.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And I was going to also ask if the language on early release, there's some language in the.
I'll remove that as well.
Thank you.
I know when you work with these, you can look at them 100 times.
I never noticed that. But thank you for catching that, yes. Because that will be on all calendars going forward that I'll need to make that change. Are there any questions about Fox and Barwell?
So, Ms. Quick, when you talked about removing the language of the early release, and that makes some sense unless we need it there. If, let's say, we have to do an early release because of a weather event, does that language need to be there? Because does that early release count as a full day as opposed to the hours?
Right now, because I think.
I mean, I understand what you're saying in terms of early release days.
Right.
It would never show up on the calendar.
It's not going to show up on the calendar, and we have some language early release in that very minuscule.
Right, in that
Right.
little paragraph.
I just want to make sure that you didn't need that language for an early release due to weather or something on that order.
Precision.
So if we're ready, we'll move on to the next 3 calendars in your packet. The first calendar is the calendar for the early colleges that partner with Wake Tech Community College. So they align their calendar to match Wake Tech's calendar. Again, you will see a district-wide teacher workday on September 30th, although I think they will have to work with their students that are actually at Wake Tech on that.
Does that need the DIST there with it?
Well, I left it off because they are still having conversation about what they will do with their students on that day. But I asked them to put a teacher workday there. So again, 177 student days, 17 work days, 11 holidays, 10 annual leave or vacation days. I'll try to find out about September 30th if they have any more information.
Mr. Fletcher, go ahead.
Tab 17, President's Day, is that an instructional day with a work day on Tuesday?
That's what it looks like. So I get this primarily from the school. They work on it with their college partner. I just try to make sure that they have the correct number of days. I can ask about that.
I would seem curious. I mean, on the calendars that we have more control over, it's
When we can, we make it a work day.
Yeah, what's this? I mean, yeah, the ordinance.
yeah. I mean, when I've shared this with some parents, they were saying Tuesday and Thursday work days that are standalones are kind of difficult
Right.
Difficult for them.
for them. Yeah, in terms of childcare, work, and
So I'll ask them if there's a particular reason.
It's a 3 or 4 day weekend. It's a different issue.
Because that Monday's a work day on nearly every other
Yeah, I mean,
calendar.
if the 17th is a holiday, it may throw you the numbers out here, but I just don't know. Having the work day on a Tuesday, it was just a question.
Okay,
And
I'll ask them.
this calendar, it has 5 work days before the beginning of school.
The 17th is marked as just a regular day.
Right.
Right now. February.
February
I'm
17th.
married to a teacher. They are open to table.
This is for, is this for the college?
So regarding the
Yes, Northway College.
regarding the February
And it's up to
17th,
Wake
18th
Tech,
that's on the table right now for discussion, Tamani will research that. Generally, when this input's coming from those 3 schools about their calendar, there's
That might have
something
already been
that's
said.
a nuance about either a program or with the calendar with Wake Tech or something. So we'll find out why that might be
Yeah.
the change there, because it is unusual, make more sense when the 17th, but there may be something
There may be a reason
programmatically that they
aligning
went
with
that
Wake
way.
Tech.
Sure.
So we'll look at that.
Oh, but then you've got the sibling issue of you could have some kids in those schools with siblings on a traditional calendar where some school kids are out and some kids are in.
But
But these are unique calendars anyway because they're unique schools.
And for North Wake, Vernon Malone, and Wax, they have to follow Wake Tech. So
It'd be great to align all K-3 to the community colleges.
wouldn't it, K-12?
Don't they decide on their own calendar?
Yes.
What do we talk about? They decide on their own, right? Don't they?
The early colleges.
All these extra.
Well, we have to approve.
I know, but we don't want to change anything.
Okay, we're going to check on
All
that
right.
moving forward.
We'll go to Wake Leadership Academy, if you'll flip one page. Similarly, you see a district workday on September 30th. They align with St. Augustine's University calendar. So they start early, August 8th, they end August 22nd. I'm sorry, May 22nd. And last one in the pack is Wake STEM Early College Calendar, which aligns with North Carolina State University.
2 weeks.
So I would like to find out for you about September 30th on the North Wake calendar and February 17th and 18th on the North Wake calendar. September 30th on North Wake. They were saying that they might have students on campus on September 30th because of Wake Tech classes. So she was going to check on that to see.
That's the district teacher.
That's the district teacher workday. So they're going to try to host it, but may have some challenges with some of their students still needing to be in class.
Just looking at the difference in the use of work days, and typically we don't see 4 work days at the end of the year. And I see that the Wake Leadership Group elected 5 work days before school begins. I have no idea what STEM would actually need, but what's the difference? I have no real hard opinion either way.
Is that a question you want me to get
Well, I
answered
just-
for you, or you?
I mean, yeah, I would think it would be a question of the principal, what's the best use of that time? And it may be that he says, well, my staff is not going to come in when I have a work day or not. I don't know.
Okay. Get that information.
Back on the midweek workdays on the Fox, there's a January 29th, which is a Wednesday in isolation. Is there a similar
on, Jim?
Fox, the first one?
So there is.
There could be a rationale for
Right.
it.
So there is conversation about schools liking to have work days on different days so that students don't miss the same specials all the time. And so this one on the 29th aligns with the end of quarter on the 27th.
Right.
But I'm assuming they decided we don't want to do Monday and Tuesday out Wednesday, so they put it in midweek, but they do like to sometimes have them on different days so students don't always miss the same specials.
No, I just, since we raised the issue about the Tuesday isolated, I thought we should at least highlight.
Right.
I know, it is. Well, he's fabulous.
That's great.
You know, that's a node. If one of these calendars does that, it might be a note that we put on the calendar that the school has organized work days so that children.
That's true. That's a good
explain
point.
to parents.
To explain to parents
Yeah.
why that's that way. So I don't want to have to send out an email to each one.
Because I guarantee you they're littles now. That they always miss X.
Yeah. I have to mark every Tuesday. That is a good explanation.
Bob's very thoughtful in the way he chooses.
Right.
He is. Are there other questions, things I can answer for you?
Seeing none, this will come back for a vote.
So I would like to answer the questions
Yeah.
at some point and try to get these approved at the next board meeting because these are for the upcoming school year and schools want to get to work on
So what we would try to do is to find some of the answers for unique questions that you had about some of them and come back possibly at our next work session. And if we were able to answer those questions to your satisfaction, we'll have it on the agenda that night for approval so that the communities for these various schools can know about their respective calendars.
And I did have one question because we'd received feedback from several advocacy groups about the possibility of May 13th marking the end of Ramadan, if that is taken into consideration when making these?
It would be, but these are 1920 calendars, and the Ramadan question is about, or other ones were about the 2021 calendar. If you're mentioning the emails that you got, these schools do consider those. I think when they're making them, they make them with their partners. These calendars typically. They make with their partnering school, or they make with their their board, their community college, or with their area superintendent. If they're like a support model school, then they make that with their leadership team.
Okay, but I just wondered if that had been brought to them as well, like to consider if that had been brought to these schools. And I totally understand that they are following. They have to align with other
and they
considerations.
also get a copy of the current traditional calendar so that they can see what the traditional calendar or what the year-round calendar has done. So they do have that information. I don't think that I explicitly said be sure to look for this, but they do have copies of their kind of like calendar so that they can make some of those same decisions like the district teacher workday on September 30th.
Okay. I just wondered if they had known that that's specifically why that was there, if that might have influenced their...
So the focus on calendar when it comes to those issues is maximizing student attendance. That has an incidental positive effect of accommodating certain groups. That's great, but that the focus needs to be on maximizing student attendance and some of the other prerogatives in the calendar law.
So as an example, next year when they work on theirs, they will look at, I will give them a blank and I will give them the traditional calendar. And here are some things that we considered when we did the 2021 calendar for them to consider. So they do get that information.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Fletcher?
Could you just refresh my memory about the 177 student days? And I know that we're 185 days or seat hours. How does it apply to these schools? And just walk me through the 177 number, if you would.
They still have to
comply with 1,025 hours of instruction.
Okay.
So they all check their calendars. We've given them periodically we actually give them calendars with cells where they put in the hours and it tallies it for them by month, just to ensure, because what we needed to ensure was that with 177 days, not only did they still have 1,025, but that we still have banked hours that are available to use. So in reality, all of our schools have more like a minimum of 1,045-ish hours, and that's where you get the bank time from, what they have beyond 1,025. A lot of our schools far exceed that, but this is like a minimum that we ask them to check and ensure that they have in order to be able to do 177 and still ensure that we have 3 days.
So without any snow, we have an extra 3 days of instruction?
We don't unless we build it back in.
But they're getting the hours.
Right.
They're in class for those extra 3 days.
Correct. 3 days. Correct.
Spread over the 170.
That's correct.
Okay.
So it's the equivalent of 180.
Right. So bang for your buck.
Equivalent of 185.
Okay, so I have your questions. I will try to research these. I'll send them to Lloyd and have them send them out.
If we're good, we'll transition to the proposals for the traditional multi-track year-round and modified for 2020-21. Molly, will you share with them what they have?
I will, but I don't have a copy for myself.
We have like two of them.
I got one. Thank you. Okay. So I typically start with the easiest first, which is the multi-track year-round. So even though you have
Because there's the least flexibility. Yeah, we can't do much to it.
But this year, as we look at a district-wide teacher workday for the 2021, I'm getting confused, for the 2021 calendar, then it kind of links them all. But I still would like to start with the multi-track year-round. So if you'll flip the first 2 pages and go to the 2021 multi-track year-round calendar. Again, this calendar has 177 instructional days, student days. The teacher work days are built into the track out time. So this is a student calendar, so you will not see teacher work days on here. I create a different calendar for all of the teacher work days, for all of the tracks that serve the multi-track year-round schools. So you don't see teacher work days in here. But teachers still have to work 17 teacher work days. The orange are days when students aren't in. That's where you'll find the holidays and the vacation days in the orange. They're not different. They're just anytime students aren't in, it's orange. There are purple days on here that are the extra teacher work days the calendar can use since we're only doing 177 student days. So you'll notice that there's an extra teacher work day or a teacher work day, an all-school teacher work day, which is something year-rounds have not been able to do, on August 24th, on October 2nd, I was able to put a teacher work day on November 3rd. That's election day that year. That is a national election. So the drafts that you see before you all currently have a teacher work day on November 3rd. And then January 4th. So in order for each track to miss 3 days, I have to identify 4 days. Anyway. There is one kind of hanging. We try not to do, we call them a hanging day, where it's like a one-off day. But there is one because that's just how the calendar works sometimes. So you'll see that on April 16th, track 4 comes in for a Friday. And we try to avoid those, but typically we are not able to avoid all of them. So we'll revisit some of this information as we go through, but that's the multi-track year-round calendar. or the draft.
So let me, I just want to clarify something that the 177 days, I believe, has allowed us to do. These are the purple days.
These are the purple days.
Right. So the purple days do allow us to now have teacher work days where teachers on all tracks can come in. We've not been able to do that before.
Correct.
And so
That's a big deal.
It really is.
So thank you.
Just one of the issues
Thank
that
you for
year-round
that.
principals and year-round teachers always speak about, not having the whole staff together, days where they can conduct some school-wide professional development. So this helps address that.
And that it's all day, it's difficult to do things on early releases, I know you've heard. So this gives them all day, not just part of the day altogether, but all day together.
Okay.
I don't think this can be avoided. In fact, I don't even understand it. But how come I get emails sometimes for some of the tracks when we're doing makeup days, do some tracks get impacted? Well, I'm sure they do differently, right?
Mm-hmm, correct.
For some reason, some parents think they get too much education.
Correct. I'll let you.
So let me just say that will, I am pretty sure that will go away now that we no longer have early release days. The problems were occurring whenever we were using early release days to make them full days, and it impacted tracks that didn't necessarily miss due to weather.
That's right.
But since we don't have early release days anymore, you know, I said I wasn't going to talk today. Because I've been talking for 5 years.
Oh, I didn't know you said that.
We just can't help ourselves on the calendar.
Yeah, but hopefully that won't be an issue anymore.
Okay, because I wouldn't want anybody to get...
Because they're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right, but we can't run a 4-tier bus schedule.
In some cases it is. And what happened with the transportation, you can't address it because of the transportation. So back to Mr. Fletcher's, that's a great value.
And it is an answer that is of little comfort.
Yeah.
It's different.
My kids make up time that track 3 missed.
Other questions about multi-track? We will come back to revisit the teacher
I'm going to
workday
study
thing,
this, but it is a curiosity to me how the track 3 has a 4-day week. And I don't see any discrepancy anywhere else, but I'll study it.
Okay.
I know you're right.
Study it and let me know. No, let me know.
I know you're right.
Because I found an error when I was getting ready to upload it. I was like, wait. Lord. And then I called him to ask him something else. He's like, it's not a calendar. No. So do let me know.
We've got a 1 in all
if you find something that's...
I'm pretty impressed.
Yeah. And the other one thing I noticed, I'm very glad to see these joint work days for our teachers. I guess with the January 4th one, track 4 is going to be gone for a while. I'm stunned that they overlap so nicely that the August one and the October one track's coming in. You did it when one track's coming in and the other one's going out.
They like it on the transition day. That works better. That's why I want to have a conversation about November 3rd.
Yeah, but I think it's important for us to protect that day and allow our students to be home. I like that. So thank you.
I just want to say I think it's great that you were able to get a district-wide teacher workday on election day in a presidential election year. I know we've had parents concerned over safety as people are in and out of the building for our schools that are polling sites.
And the 177 really has allowed us to be able to do that.
Yes.
All right, if we'll flip to the next easier calendar. The next one after year round. The modified calendar.
So nice looking.
It is. So this calendar, and we've added some schools to this calendar. Some support model schools have been added to this calendar. So I was going to try to tell you all of them, but I know I won't remember. Southeast, Centennial, Moore Square, Partnership, Carver.
Those are it. Those are the ones that are modified calendars historically. And then there are 2 additional Restart schools that are using that calendar.
East Wake Middle and East Garner Elementary School. So you have kind of the original 5. and then 2.
And East Garner Elementary, not middle.
Correct. And they just happen to be using those. They could select whatever calendar they wanted legally because they have charter flexibility to restart schools. So they're not modified calendar schools per se. They're just tracking those same calendar dates.
Would you say those 5 again?
Southeast Raleigh Magnet High School, Moore Square Magnet Middle, Centennial Magnet Middle, Partnership Magnet Elementary, and Carver.
Carver, okay, all right. That's the one I was missing.
Okay, so you'll notice on this calendar, school starts the last week in July. Typically, they follow 9 weeks on, 2 weeks off. They still do 177 student days. Like multi-track year-round, their teacher work days are embedded in the track-out days. So you won't, this is a student calendar, so you won't see teacher work days identified on here as teacher work days. They have Election Day on November 3rd. They're out. They have a 2-week winter break, actually 2 weeks today. They have a 2-week spring break, and they get out right before Memorial Day.
And Nightdale is not going to modify it. They're going to the early
If Nightdale
college.
is approved, they would likely follow the calendar that works with Wake Tech.
Okay. Just making sure I have them all lined up.
It's not noted on that Wake Tech calendar because they're not approved yet.
That's on the agenda for tonight.
Yes. Just making sure I'm remembering where it goes.
Yep.
Nightdale High School.
Questions? So before we go to the traditional calendar, I'd like you to flip back to the front of your packet so that you will see information that was shared with the traditional calendar committee. So the committee to create the draft, I counted today, and there were 35 to 36 people, perhaps 37, maybe somebody missed signing in, on that committee to create that calendar. And so we start with the law and then kind of our Wake County school practices about how we create that calendar. So I'll give you a second if you want to take a minute and just kind of go over these. It gives you a start date and an end date as set by the state. Tells you holidays, vacation days that you can use, 17 teacher work days, and then other practices from the district.
On their paid holidays, these are state mandated?
These are state holidays.
Okay.
On the second page, practices are just what they are. They're practices. They're not policy. They're what we attempt to do when we have the opportunity. You'll see other dates to note, presidential election day. If we can, and this year, because of the 177, we're able to use that. So if you're ready, we'll take a look at the traditional calendar. You'll see that the first day for students is August 24th, which aligns with the law that says it can't start any earlier than the Monday closest to August 26th, and that is August 24th. Typically, the committee, we start with that date and we just start counting days to get to a quarter. After we get to the quarter, we decide where we want to put the workday that aligns with that quarter. If we have some flexibility, we'll go back and put work days in other places to support schools or families if we are able to. So you'll notice, for example, the quarter that ends on October 27th, instead of having a work day on October 28th, the committee decided to kill two birds with one stone, essentially, and move that work day to November 3rd, which again is election day. You'll see October 16th because we have a little flexibility in the calendar to put in a day. So sometimes we're able to just stick a work day in. One of the things we tried to do was make sure that each month had at least one work day. And initially, October kind of didn't, so we put one in. Question?
So the gap between the end of the quarter and the workday is not a problem in terms of work card prep and those things?
Correct. Okay. So the committee, and because we have different academic departments working with us, we thought, okay, we could still do the teacher workday on the 3rd and have report cards ready for the 10th. And that was the consensus in the room.
All right.
So you'll see that this calendar does allow for a 2-week winter break. Yay. So you'll see, in order to make that 2 weeks work, like December 21st is a teacher work day. That's really to make the 2 weeks. And that's another way we sometimes use work days to help everybody. You'll see January, there's a work day. The quarter end work day is on January 19th. And then we were able to have 2 work days, as you noted, Mr. Fletcher, February 15th and 16th, which is President's Day. That also gives us some flexibility for weather makeup. So there are lots of things that go into creating this particular calendar. You'll see that March has a work day on March 12th. One of the requests from the stack, Kathy, that's your superintendent's me. So one of the requests, I'm just kind of throw something out. Originally, you'll see you have April 5th and 6th. So originally, the calendar had a teacher work day on March 26th, which is the Friday before spring break, and then we had April 5th after. And one of the recommendations from that committee was the 5 days before a holiday are not the most, okay. So I moved it to April 5th and April 6th. That's kind of at your pleasure, but that was one recommendation. I looked at lots of recommendations from the staff and where I could make those changes I did. So that's one thing that I just wanted to point out to you. You'll see that May has a teacher work day on May 13th, and the school year ends on June 10th with a work day on June 11th. So there's some weather makeup flexibility in the second half of the school year with extra teacher work days in there. There, of course, you see the banked hours are dispersed in the weather makeup.
Something else to look at in terms of the days available for weather makeup in order of utilization. Not all work days are listed, and that's intentional because the schools really, the teachers really want to know that there are some days that won't be taken for weather makeup. Now, and so that they don't, so if they're planning something or whatever, that it's not on a list for weather makeup. And we have that more of that flexibility because we now have more work days in the calendar. There's still the print in itty-bitty font on the side that says that the superintendent can still take other days if they're needed, but we try to start with a sufficient number listed that at least demonstrates the intent that not all of the work days would be used for weather makeup just because they're available.
Right. As an example, we try not to use the end of quarter, even though it doesn't come right at the end of the quarter, we try not to list the end of quarter as weather makeup so that teachers can be assured to have those days to work on grades. And so we kind of pick the ones we think will work for weather makeup. Are there any questions about teacher work days on this calendar, those that are aligned with the end of quarter, those that are not aligned with the end of quarter, but we put in there?
So I just want to make sure that I understood you correctly. When we looked at the previous two calendars, the modified and the multi-track year-round calendar, where work days were not listed, would they generally then follow the work days that were listed on the traditional calendar?
Oh, not necessarily. As an example, if you want to flip back to the multi-track, typically, so just let's look at track 1, which tracks out, oh gosh, these numbers are a little now. They're not so little on my desk. Okay. Woo! I usually read it on the screen. I know, thank you.
You need to read
I do. Over my contacts. Track 1 ends on September 11th. Are we all looking at that, the red track? Typically, the work days would probably be September 14th and 15th. And then maybe they'll have one October 2nd now. So sometimes there's 2 or 3 right when the track ends. Sometimes they're split between the 2, but they're embedded in those white days, but they don't follow the traditional. The modified calendar is the same way. So when kids on modified track out on September 25th, likely the teacher work days are September 28th, September 29th, and September 30th.
So we've seen requests come from the community about trying to align, different teacher work days with religious holidays, for example. Under this multi-track year-round calendar, looking at May 13th, would that be a teacher work day on the traditional calendar, but would year-round students?
Year-round would still likely be in school. One of the challenges, that's something we could consider. I shouldn't say we can't. If it's a teacher work day and teachers aren't required to come back, for example, May 13th might be a teacher work day, but it's in the middle of the week. So for year-round teachers, when they do their 3 days, then you'll notice they're out for the next 2.5 weeks. So asking them sometimes to come back for a real teacher work day, which is why I want to have conversation about November 3rd as a separate conversation. It's more difficult for them if they were really going to come back and do work, to come back in the middle of their track out time, outside of their regular teacher work days.
January 4th for track.
Right, so January 4th aligns with when someone's tracking in and tracking out.
No, it's a Christmas holiday.
Yeah,
that is true. That is true.
If I could just reiterate where we are on the law regarding accommodating religion in the school calendar. The focus of the calendar is maximizing student attendance. If it has an incidental, favorable effect of accommodating certain groups, then that's fine. But the primary focus is to maximize student attendance, and there is not any right for any particular organization or religious group to have that as a day on the calendar that is, always a guaranteed sort of right for that to be a day that is a teacher work day or a non-student day. So I just want to kind of reiterate where we are on it. I know that it's listed in here, but that was just as a sort of a note, not a right, other religious holidays, and the focus needs to sort of be on student attendance on those days.
When we consider other dates, really what we're looking at is the presence of students and staff potentially in our schools that would be absent, and so therefore it makes sense to consider a day for a teacher work day or a day off because of the number of absences that otherwise might accrue. So it supports the instructional nature of the calendar.
So hearing that, a point that I would like to bring up for consideration is just because of the way we have clustered multi-track year-round schools in this county, and if you look at the demographics of the citizens where those schools are clustered, I believe there would be a larger number of people that would be observing the holiday on May 13th in Western Wake County in multi-track year-round schools, more so than the rest of the county. And as it comes to attendance, we have seen, particularly with a large immigrant population that comes to America, that are in multi-track year-round schools, the parents willing to take the children out of schools. And we have attendance problems in many of those schools where children are taken out of schools for international travel. And so if there is an opportunity to consider that in that area, I'd just like to encourage the board to do so.
And your comments certainly in keeping with the legal parameters that I was laying out. Thank you.
Well, and it would be helpful for us to have data on attendance, because there's some concern that I've received from traditional calendar principals in some parts of the county about travel, and it's throughout the county, really, with families who are international. So if we could, I think we need to emphasize attendance, and that is a core value. Again, kids have to be in school in order to learn. So it would be helpful when we're talking about calendars to encourage attendance as a hallmark. But it would be helpful to have that data both for traditional and from year-round, because I want us to make sure we're making decisions not based on some individual feedback we get, but on the trends and realities of what's happening in our schools.
Well, if I can just sharpen that request a little bit, I don't think you're looking for comprehensive attendance data, but what you're looking for, if I'm understanding correctly, is are there any days where there are particular spikes that we should be aware of?
So we should be aware of.
Yeah.
So that we can make that decision, and the parameters Mr. Blumberg is requesting us to make.
Yeah. Mr. Fletcher?
I mean, that would be an easy flip.
Yeah.
So I did a little research, and other days, May 13th, other days were not a part of the school year, so there wasn't attendance data.
Well, now, that would be, in the past, it would be a movable date, so for us to be cognizant of.
Can I just make one other comment just to round things out? I'm sorry, but I do want to note that under your policy for attendance for students, it is an excused absence for a particular student, and I just think the whole conversation needs to be rounded out. It basically says observation of an event required or suggested by a religion of the student and the student's parents a minimum of 2 days each academic year. So that's right in your policy on that. So individual students certainly can. So when you're talking about the macro level of the calendar law, then it's the student attendance that's paramount. So thank you. I just wanted to round that out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Fletcher, you had a question, comment?
Well, the issue would be attendance on the day, not I don't think the international travel, it's 4 weeks to go to India and meet family is a different issue than whether a workday is placed on a particular calendar day. Both of them deserve to be reviewed. I think the issue is attendance on the particular day in question historically. And do we have any information that would guide us one way or the other that we have a significant absence of young people of a particular faith on a particular day? Because we wouldn't know what their faith is, so it'd just be a typical, do we have an increase in absences on a particular day that would cause us to want to change our calendar?
Well, and I don't know if it's possible or not to meet the May 13th on the year-round calendar, but if so, I would be reticent to put a work day that the teachers on track out need to come back for, because that would be an inconvenience to a lot of people. So there's a difference between a work day for people who are tracked in than a work day for anybody who's tracked out.
Understood. I was just going to say, I think part of this is just an overall question. If we should look at absenteeism in multi-track year-round schools and see how that differs from traditional calendar schools.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Fletcher clarified the question.
So I've got a couple of things to look at. I'm going to just review because I want to be sure I'm hearing correctly. Looking at a way to add May 13th or switch a day so that May 13th can be recognized on the multi-track year-round. Is that a request?
I would make that request.
So you're actually saying then okay. I was trying to figure out how to do it without teachers coming back.
Well, if there's a better way to organize that, I'm open to that.
Track 2 would be
That's the one I'm
tracked
looking
out.
at.
Right.
Yeah. That's the only one.
But we don't have to have all, in the past, we haven't always had teacher work days for all tracks.
Right.
The purples give us that option. So I'd say the request is to explore.
Explore, yes. Thank you.
So what we can do, we can explore that position or question that you presented, and we can also see what we can obtain from data to bring back the second time we review that and see if that influences the direction you want to go. We can look at both. We can look at exploration of how that might impact the multi-track calendar as well as modified with what you said today, as well as see what data points we could pull and bring back to you.
Absolutely. And whatever recommendation you would have based on
that work.
That would work perfectly. Thank you.
I assume you'd like, could you just say that? I assume you'd like the same thing for modified? Okay, all right, I have it down, I just want to be sure.
Are there other items that the board wishes us to examine in terms of the calendar?
Are the semesters fairly even between the two?
Fairly even, that's something the schools look at. We try to put a few more work days, when I say few, I mean one maybe, in second semester, thinking that the weather, unlike this year, hopefully the weather would be like, so that we could maybe make that time up in the second semester. So sometimes second is a little longer on purpose. So I have one more question for the board. Okay. Currently, I've identified, and I'll say I because I identified a district-wide teacher work day. I tried to make it coincide with the election teacher work day that we put in place. But that day falls in the middle of somebody's track. Track 2, track 3, or track 3. So in looking back to try to make a district-wide teacher work day like we have in the 1920 calendar, I looked at every transitional day, and it seems that October 23rd is a day that might work for all calendars. But for the multi-track year-round, it would mean moving the January 4th teacher workday that the STAT committee requested to October 23rd. So I just kind of wanted to get your opinion, your thoughts on, it's convenient to have it on November 3rd when everybody already has a teacher workday. But I could alter both the traditional and the modified to have a teacher workday on October 23rd, but it would mean moving the January 4th workday on the multi-track year-round to October 23rd.
I know.
Well, I guess I would not be super in favor of that because we are trying to encourage civic engagement, and there's a lot of teachers.
It would still leave November 3rd as a teacher workday. It just wouldn't be for district-wide PD.
Right. The November 3rd should not be a district-wide PD workday, I guess is what I'm suggesting, because that would basically require all teachers to be present.
Correct.
And there are plenty of teachers who, we have our representative from NCIE here, we have plenty of teachers who recognize the value of being engaged in the political process.
Okay. All right, so then I'll look to move that to October 23rd. So the next drafts, among other things, the next drafts that you will see will move that. We'll put a teacher workday on October 23rd.
But I'm sorry. So we would need to have that as a holiday or not as a teacher workday? I'm confused. November 3rd.
Yeah.
When they're the district-wide teacher work days, the intent is often that there is, that's not a teacher work day. We have some teacher work days where teachers are allowed to take vacation days and other teacher work days where they're not. So the November 3rd ought to be a teacher work day that teachers would be allowed to take a vacation day on. If our district-wide, where we want to do district-wide PD, those are days where everybody's required to be there, and you shouldn't be able to take a vacation day on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but what will
Protected versus unprotected.
But what will November 3rd be then? What will November 3rd
It could still be a work day,
Yes.
but you can take a vacation. It's a work day that you can take a vacation on.
Will it still be district-wide?
Still be district-wide.
The
So for
nomination.
clarity, among all the district work days, we have tried to, as we did for this upcoming year, identify one of them that could provide common professional development for all teachers throughout the district. And so the proposal that was coming forth from the committee, as was is that date would be the November 3rd day. If we don't have it on that date, November 3rd would still stay as a work day. It just wouldn't be the common professional learning day that you would see throughout the whole district. We would switch it to another day. And Tamani's looking, exploring October being that time.
October 23rd. What does that do to October 16th on the traditional calendar?
That would move October 16th to October 23rd.
To the 23rd.
On traditional. And
That's
on
the last day of the fair for parents.
Did you look that up?
Please don't say that. That's okay.
It's tied to attendance. I'm sorry. It's tied to attendance.
There's quite a
They could
few
go on
other days
Saturday the 17th.
And honestly, in the past few years, we've not been able to have a teacher work day aligned with the fair. So.
Okay, so that's
I've noticed.
it's not in our principles.
Because I need a weekday.
To think that we could have a district-wide professional learning day for the district is an exciting opportunity.
It is.
That we can have. We can make it work. We're getting some input from you about what day that might be.
I just would not want it on election day.
Okay.
Yeah, how many of our multi-track year-round schools are precincts, service precincts? That would be not that.
Like 63 or 68 schools across the district.
Of our schools, but I'm thinking of our multi-tracks, because we're at the moving the...
I know
But I did
two in my
List of
district.
schools sitting at home on the special accommodating.
They do.
I have 2 in my district.
I think I've got 4 in my district that I can think of.
We good? Okay, so we'll come back with you to another time with those things we've explored further.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right now.
All right, the next item on our discussion for work session is our legislative agenda and guiding principles. I'd like to call Courtney Trotter to join us, as well as Lloyd and Tim. We've had a variety of discussions that have led to where we are right now. And today is when it comes to the full board for discussion. Before we talk about the specific agenda itself and any wordsmithing that we may want to do, I've asked Mr. Crowder to give us just a little bit of a insight as to, from his perspective, the value of a document like this, what it will be used for, how it should be used, how we might use it as individual board members, and so on. Some legislative agendas become nearly a novel, and we're trying to work toward something other than that. Mr. Haggerty gave us, I think, some really good advice, having been in the legislature and having received many of these things, so trying to streamline it. So, Mr. Crowder, if you wouldn't mind taking a couple minutes to just sort of frame what something like this might be useful for, and then we can think about, is this meeting a need?
Sure. So, Mr. Chair, thank you, and board members. Glad to be with you again for this next long session, which which could be substantially different than long sessions that we've worked together in the past, just given the makeup of the General Assembly now. But with, as the chair has mentioned, with this legislative agenda and the way that it's structured and formatted for this presentation of the agenda for the school district is really more of a infographic, if you will, something that's meant to be a little bit more concise, direct, and quite frankly used as a conversation piece and a leave behind when meeting directly with legislators or providing this for members of the Wake County delegation and others who might engage those members or members of the General Assembly on our behalf. And also with the with the second page, being focused more on the core beliefs, it's meant to be, again, guideposts, if you will, for, how we might respond or how decision makers or policymakers might expect that we would respond and react to certain legislative proposals that may be under consideration. As you'll note, it does reference on the first page the North Carolina School Boards Association's 2019-2020 agenda, which is much more lengthy, more detailed. But as you know, we work very closely with the School Boards Association in terms of responding to proposals, budget, the state budget, as well as specific policy proposals. But for our purposes and our usage, this document, again, was intentionally meant to be a little bit more accessible, a little shorter, more concise, and more of an infographic with guidance on how we respond. And I think it achieves that. I hope you all would agree.
So just as a way of information and timing, so we want the contact information, because again, that's something that Mr. Crowder highlighted, that one of the most important things for legislators is that they know who to call when an issue comes up, because many things come up at the last minute. You can do all the best planning you want to, but if we don't have contact information, that's not going to be terribly helpful. So we have Mr. Crowder, Mr. Simmons, and myself's contact information there. But the idea would be that these are kind of framing ideas that any board member in their conversations with personnel this is the framing principles around which discussions would be had.
Sure, and to the point about the contact information, and as you all know, as we get into the legislative rhythm, there is constant, I can use that word. Sure. Rhythm, legislation. It's really about being able to provide information so that when there are those dynamic questions or inquiries that require a sort of rapid response, folks are able to reach out and ask questions. Received one this weekend that we are responding to for tomorrow by tomorrow at 2. And so it begins, right? And that will be the way that we'll work all session. And again, there are things that will come up that we'll need to respond to that this document doesn't necessarily speak to, but the contact information is there so that we can be in contact quickly and respond as completely as possible.
All right, so with that context, and it is our goal, if we can get there, and I don't want to rush it, we can have more conversation at the board table, but it would be our goal, if we could, to get this to a level that we're comfortable with it, that we could then, as a board, pass it as our agenda so that we can begin with our formal conversations. All right, I see Ms. Mahaffey's hand, Mr. Fletcher, and Mr. Sutton.
So the first thing that jumped out, of course, was the not necessarily looking at but like some of them end in periods, some of them do not. There's some spacing issues, and at the bottom it really having titles, I know, but titles for you and Tim come first and then Courtney come after. Just some consistency issues. I know that's not why we're here, but it really jumped out at me. But I appreciate the living wage being a part of teacher pay, principal pay, and then for diverse workforce, especially with our Teaching Fellows program, back, but not at the strength it was before, and knowing that no HBCUs are included in the Teaching Fellows program.
And do know that in the conversation, that would be absolutely part of the discussion.
Right, and that's why I'm assuming that part of that was in there as a lead.
Absolutely. I guess, Mr. Fletcher, you're next.
Yeah, I would love to see an additional clarification under the K3. Just change it to 17 instead of 18, 16, 17, 17, just 17 kids, K-3. Now, I'd rather have it be a different number, but at least give us that.
Yeah, so take the complexity out of it.
Take two kids from
That's sanity.
Yeah. That to me makes I understand that request.
And somehow that didn't make it into the School Boards Association plans.
So when I was looking at this again last night, Ms. Moore, I think, has highlighted that the K-3 is really our big issue. If we can get traction on that, that is really got to be our heavy lift. And I'm not sure that that's completely reflected in this statement. So I don't know. I don't have magic language, but I mean, I think we want fully funding. I appreciate you raising that issue. What you're asking for, if I understand, Mr. Fletcher, is consistent number of students per year.
Right, and it would be
rather than giving a number of 17.
Well, right now it's specified 18, 16, 17, 17.
Right.
But
that is a nightmare to manage.
But in addition to this, we still want waivers.
Yes.
Well, I didn't say anything about that line.
When I'm taking away, we're adding.
No.
Give us the 7. I would love to have it be 17 plus 3 flexibility for K-3.
And so the question there would be how much of that specificity should go into this document and how much should that be in conversation? Can we find that language? And that's why I wonder if a consistent number of students per year might be a general enough language that could give the grounds for conversation. I think your point is absolutely important.
I would tend to lean toward the more specific. Let me share a couple of other thoughts. I shared this with some parents yesterday, and they were confused by under the staffing column, grading systems. We're so used to the A to F school grading, they were wondering, is that student grades? You're going to do away with A to F student grades? So somewhere in that statement, we need to talk about school grading.
What if we just change the system to grading of schools instead of grading systems?
Fine. And then on the living wage, I'm not sure the state's going to look at this as saying it's our responsibility to have a living wage for all of your employees. Is there some way to incorporate into this to bring the counties to what the state has adopted for the state employees? And maybe that's the conversation as well. They obviously didn't, when they had the opportunity, look at school employees as being equally valuable as state employees. So I'm not sure that's the right language. I'm comfortable with the sentiment. So that's my feedback.
Piggybacking on that one, I agree with the sentiment, and I think part of this was to, Mr. Crowder said, to be more concise, specific, direct. And I think some of the language in a few of these is still a little bit vague or ambiguous. So I think we ought to be a little bit more direct on the living wage and actually say $15 an hour. That's just my personal.
I think
living wage is still kind of, okay, what is it? Is that 13? Is that 13.50? Is that 14? I don't know what living wage.
I'm not sure we're convinced that 15 is a living wage.
No, well,
it's a better wage.
But you got to compare it to other businesses.
I think we ought to be specific on what we think that, and we've talked about 15 sort of being the numbers. I think we ought to spell it out. And I would say the same on or add to the election districts that are not only returning to staggered terms in odd number of years, but back to 4-year terms as well as opposed to 2 would be my problem.
Staggered 4-year terms?
Yes.
I mean, to have staggered, you have to have more than 2.
Yeah, otherwise you can't.
But it would be good to be specific. Yes, I agree.
So back on the living wage, would you suggest striking living wage and replacing it with ensures a minimum $15 an hour wage, or have living wage parentheses $15 an hour? I think either would work.
So I would get closer to Kathy's point earlier when she talked about, like, more than 2.5. Again, because we're WAKE, but we're asking for the statewide, and we saw this with the bus driver, the way they did that last year. And I guess I'm going to go back to Kathy's earlier point around the inequity. That's so saying $15. Again, this is for legislative purposes, but we have to be clear in our language that our employees are also looking at this as what we believe about them. So I would defer back to, I don't know if you had specific language, but when you talked about earlier your perspective on the inequities that happens when we do this. So just something to think about, because
it's almost about incorporating all state employees, including school system employees,
that's my point. It has to
in the $15 that they've already approved.
See, because I viewed it a different way, which is as opposed to being specific at 15. I viewed it as saying it ensures the same living wage paid to other state or county employees. You know, but I respect whichever way.
I think I get my point. It's needs to be more specific.
Yeah, but if you say it like this, it means they can.
Whatever that might be, I'm okay.
What we're saying is they should have included all state employees, including school system employees.
Yes.
It needs to be a little bit more direct.
Well, I had a couple of...
I'm sorry, Scott. Yeah, I was
okay.
right.
No. I agree about the K-3 class size, and I wish there were a way on this form, on this agenda, to prioritize that more than anything else. Because I strongly feel, and I agree with other people who have said this before me, that unfunded mandate affects literally everything we do. It affects our budget, it affects facilities, it affects everything. And I wish there were a way to phrase that more strongly and to have that highlighted. Comparing this to the NCSBA, they mention facilities on their legislative agenda, but we don't talk about facilities on ours at all. I don't know if that's
around K-3 class size.
I'm moving on. Just but like facilities as a second. Next time,
The facilities issue, just for reference, the facilities by state statute is to be covered locally rather than by the state. The state is talking about a large bond, but much of that probably is more important for the rural counties than it is for the urban counties that you deal with growth. So that issue is why we stayed away from it in this document, not because the facilities are statutorily supposed to be locally covered issues.
Okay.
I'm just saying that's the logic for where we are.
We would still get something, hypothetically, if there were to be a state.
Not necessarily.
Well, in terms of the previous state bond strategy and the draft distribution for the bond that was proposed for the 18 election cycle, we would have gotten about $178 million out of that, even having to do an exorbitant match. The state gives $1, we put in 3 or more. So there would be some in the state bond. The part about that's on the table now is that the Senate is looking at a pay-as-you-go strategy, which will suck up all the money that's available for salaries, for additional personnel to deal with adverse childhood experiences. That is a poison pill in terms of anything else for the state to fund. And so I think that it is necessary for us to put some support behind the bond referendum idea as opposed to the cash Senate strategy. Because if that goes through and they're going to allocate $400 million a year out of cash flows, nothing else is going to get funded new. And then there'll be a lot of strings on how that $400 million is spent as well.
And it also, and that Senate bill proposal would also, any school district that was not compliant with class size would be ineligible for the funds.
So, I mean, that's a poison pill in my opinion.
Ms. Scott,
I just had a few more things. I know the living wage, when a teacher said more, if this could be even described more as like a thriving wage. I mean, we want to recruit and, retain teachers, and living wage versus thriving wage. I mean, I think that the difference in the language says something, but I realize that's not necessarily a popular way of phrasing that. Right. When we talk about diverse workforce, and I know this mentioned that the teaching fellows and advocating for teaching fellows at HBCUs, I said that before. I'm just going to keep saying that. I wish that we could include that.
Be specific.
To be specific about that, because we have some great HBCUs, and it's come to my attention that they've backed away from even encouraging people to go into education, because as a society, this is just my opinion, but as a society, we don't respect our teachers enough, and that's felt, and people don't want to go into a career where they're not getting paid and they're not respected, and so that's just something I think that language could be more specific in there. And then the last thing is the read to achieve, and just some of our testing. It's not effective. It's not helping. Again, my opinion, but I don't see the read to achieve program as helping our students. And the testing there's just too much.
Yeah.
There's too much.
Yeah.
So I'm stepping.
No, I think that's.
We haven't said any of that testing. Too much testing.
Yes, and I would include. I think for diverse workforce, we need to be specific as to what we're asking for, because otherwise it's just a blanket statement. And I think if we're specific, we have to ask.
Or somebody said to me, "Do you need diversity of thought and opinion?"
Yep.
Representation. That was a legitimate question.
And for teacher pay, I would add and continue increasing teacher pay towards or beyond the national average, because that's still an issue for teachers, which goes with thriving and $15 an hour. And for understaffing and accountability, again, making sure that our ask is put forward first. I think we need to move that around and start with increase the number of school counselors, psychologists, and social workers to national standards in order to address adverse childhood experiences and build student resilience. And we need, lead with what we want to say, and then why.
And I'm so sorry, I had one more thing, but I didn't circle it. The advanced degree, while there is the bill being moved forward about doing that, there's one part of that and the wording that concerns me with the way it's worded right now, that talks about it has to be in your field. Your master's degree has to be exactly what you're teaching, and that makes it nearly impossible for some specific types of teachers to get the pay that they deserve. A high school English teacher with a master's in French literature, for example, different types of specialists. It's a master's degree in something relative to their field is actually really beneficial for the students. But it might not necessarily be exactly what's on their teaching license or their title at the school. So if there were more flexibility within the bill that's already out there, or if we could...
Yeah, if you're a social studies teacher, if you're, and you get your master's in literacy, that's still something that can be helpful, that's relative to your field, but it might not be exactly having a master's in social studies.
Oh, we need to put that in there.
Yeah.
So, if I can, Mr. Chairman, one of the things that we talked about, myself, just to individual board members, when we've had these conversations, has been trying to get something that is more compact and direct. And so, while I don't disagree with anything that has been said, I do want to caution us that if we start getting a laundry list of additional items, we can keep going, because there are very important issues that we haven't even begun to include here. Charter school funding and how that affects allotments. What about And this is one we may want to include, the whole idea of district unity versus proposals to break up the district into smaller districts. We can keep spinning off a number of other important legislative priorities, but I think if we're trying to prioritize, then we have to decide, are these the ones that we want? And if we want to add new ones, then we would need to see which ones they overshadow and then move other priorities in place of. Otherwise, the more that we add, the more we diminish each individual one.
But the less specific we are, they're going to bypass. I mean, I like the specificity.
And in some cases, that's good. I agree.
But I don't think they understand. We don't know what to ask here. We can.
Well, because I know at some point we talked about even maybe having 4 different categories as opposed to 3. And so, this one comes down to 3. So I know there's a reason for it between the communication folks that we have. I'm going to trust them on it, but I don't know. I just want to be careful that we don't just start adding more and adding more and adding more. Because, the question I had was about the proposals to break up the district and district unity and how we might want to address that. And, I can think of others that should be on here, but
under teacher pay, her point would be really missed if we didn't include that there, because if we're going to go with legislation that says advanced degree, we need to be sure we handle the one piece of that you said is in there that we're not looking at.
Yeah.
I mean, the alternative is something, if you look at our strategic plan, where, remember, you have your core beliefs or something set out in bigger boxes, and then on the inside of the document, you have all of those individual objectives, maybe with more specificity. If you wanted to replace the core beliefs with kind of like a more detailed description of each of those specific policy positions, you could. It's just a matter of how much information you want to try to convey in what honestly can be almost like an elevator speech. Those of us who go down there, and I'll defer to my other colleagues on here that work in the legislature for their opinions, but if you look at the magnificent document that's produced by the Public School Forum, some of you all have gotten that and read it cover to cover. I will tell you that the average legislator does not do that.
Right.
It needs to be short. It needs to be direct.
They will look at the card.
They'll look at the card.
The book.
And so if you think that you need a specific piece of language in there to be very powerful, I encourage us to put it in. But I just want to be careful in terms of lengthening the document, putting so much detail into it that it just diminishes its effectiveness.
I'm not hearing that we're, putting, thesis papers on every single one. I'm hearing 1, maybe 2 sentences, instead of, or changing a word here or there. I don't think anyone is trying to make this, a booklet. I think it's add language so that if you're reading this, it's 1 or 2 sentences in that elevator speech that are specific and have the intent of informing and providing the why.
I agree with all of the suggested changes for clarification. I think the living wage clarification, I definitely think the grading system clarification is very good, because when I read it, it didn't automatically click to me that we were talking about schools. I think the election district clarification, the K-3 class, all of those are good clarifications. Again, all I'm saying is just let's be careful as we look to rewrite these and clarify them, that we don't make them too long or too detailed for the purpose that it's intended.
We do want them to be opening of conversation rather than sometimes.
Yeah, but we all need to be saying the same thing.
No, they do. We need opening of conversation, so sometimes we get the idea that because it's on our list, we're going to get it done. we need to open the conversation. Monica, you're trying to say something.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I didn't hear anything that's more than probably a few changes on each of these. I don't feel like it's going to take long. So that's just my opinion. I haven't listened. The other piece of this is, and you know, I haven't had to say it this year, but for me, and you know, I spent my time 2 years telling you this is true. I think we have to put on paper what we believe, so that our teachers and our workforce also read this and understand our belief system here. For me, what I heard Heather and Lindsay giving, specifically, of course, I mean, clearly self-serving, you all know, I went to HBCU. I think that is a heart statement. I think that is speaking into our professional workforce about what we believe. Yes, it's going to be 5 or 6 more words, but again, I won't spend anybody else's term talking about hard work, but I think that's what I heard both of you say.
But and that
this allows us to speak into what we believe. Mm-hmm. We believe the state should be developing and committing to a thriving wage, not just that we develop a structure, because that's what it says here, but that we believe that in order to commit fully to all of our employees, both certified and non-certified, we have to say that. Because this is for legislators, but our employees are also reading this.
Right.
That's true.
And I think if you are, you know, specific and concise, you know, a Hemingway over Faulkner, they will pick up the phone and say, hey, Jim, what do you mean when you say this for diverse workforce? And you can say, you know, well, there's, you know, we know that this is what the Teaching Fellows program used to be. We know for our black and brown students, if they have a teacher that looks like them within the first 4 years of their elementary school career, they're more likely to succeed, and that's why we believe in this commitment, and that ties to our core beliefs of X, Y, and Z, and our vision and our mission. I mean, I think that's easy, but we have to be direct and specific, and we have to ask.
If I could just say something about that item in particular, and we've been talking around about this a little bit. Some of the statements are more specific about the ask than others, right? The statement with regards to a diverse workforce is not specific in the ask. And I think everywhere that we make an ask, we need to make sure that it is an ask that is the work of the legislature in some way, shape, or form, either in a recent action or a pending action or conversation that's happening, so that it aligns with what they're already talking about.
Yes.
And so for diverse workforce, it could mean many things. And many of those things are things that we as a district have an obligation in as well. For the legislature, maybe the statement is to increase or to include HBCUs in the Teaching Fellows program, because that's a specific get, a specific ask. I'm sorry, but I think that's something that is specific enough and targeted that they actually do. That's separate from efforts that we might do, because that might be too vague.
So it's 5:28, and I think I have heard plenty of edits that I think we can do to refine and clean this up. And the challenge of putting together something like a legislative agenda is you can't just do it at a table with tons of people. So, you know, this was the straw person to start working at. And it sounds to me like it's captured a majority of things, but it needs some tweaking and editing. My recommendation is that we pull it from tonight's agenda, because I don't think I think in principle we're roughly there, but I think we're talking about language that is critical. So my recommendation would be to go ahead and pull this from tonight's agenda for approval. Those of us who have been taking notes, I think, can take it and can come up with some revision and bring a revised version back to our next board meeting, which will be March the 5th. And hopefully we can get that refined, because we do need to start having these conversations with legislators.
So moved.
We already are having, we actually don't need a formal motion. If there's an objection to that, I need to know that, but otherwise.
Well, how does that work for timing, Mr. Crowder?
From a timing perspective, the conversation right now, as you all know, Senator Alexander and Representative Adcock are the co-chairs for the Wake County Legislative Delegation this biennium, and the tentative, very tentative date for us to have our meeting with them is March 11th. So this would give us time if we can get things sort of settled by the 5th. Thank you for the question.
That would be my
And the 11th would be the time that we would have a chance to sort of talk about it with the legislative delegation at that time. So we could take the extra time, and it would be appreciated, I'm sure, about the delegation.
Yeah.
I think the one of the ads that wasn't listed was the supporting the statewide bond referendum for school facilities, and maybe it would make sense for individual board members to email Tim or whatever about whether that's something you think should be included. I mean, most of them were language ones, but that was not on here, and so if
It's on the School Board Association.
yeah, I get it. No, I was just, but Bill had raised whether that's should be added to this, and I
don't know that we have consensus on that.
Yeah, we should talk about if we want to say the bond, or we're going to talk about school construction funds, because the Senate does not have a bond proposal, and the House, we assume they will, presume they will. Speaker Moore, as you know, is sort of doing his barnstorming across the state, having meetings, and interesting if you look where he's stopping and whose Senate district it is, but it's interesting. But that barnstorming is happening as he sort of tries to build support across the state for the proposal that is forthcoming from the House. And the governor has yet a third proposal that I expect we're going to hear him talk about next Monday at the State of the State, and then we'll see in his budget proposal. So I know we want to. If we want to say bond, or do we want to say?
Well, I think bond if the.
My concern is that the cash plan of the Senate
we don't
Yeah.
is a
That's a valid concern.
Right.
That's valid.
I think that issue is important. I think we need to work with Courtney to be careful that the language that we put in is the right language, because we don't want to run down a wrong hole. I think the concept is there and is flagged for consideration. Mr. Sutton?
Well, I mean, if you all would take it and work on it, I mean, I think the idea is to kind of sharpen it. I think you've left yourself enough room to add some and to still be concise enough to Mr. Hagerty's point that we can still get it to one page, and then there's, even if there's 3 things, 4 things, and bring that back and we can react at the next meeting. I don't know if we have time to.
We don't have time to wordsmith it here. So if you have issues that have not otherwise been raised, please make sure that at least I get them. And at a minimum, the 4 of us on the Tracy, Lloyd, Tim, Courtney, and I will confab with the edits. We'll try to circulate it among other people as well before the March 5th meeting, so you have a chance to see edits. How do we get to a compromise strategic document?
And will that come to work session then?
We'll have to put it on the work session.
Okay.
Yes, I think it'd be unwise to go right to the board table.
Thank you.
But when it comes out, if there can be conversation, so that just know the timeliness that we want to get this accomplished at our next meeting. We'll be good. Okay. Thank you very much. We are adjourned from work session, and we'll move over as promptly as possible to board meeting.
Not really.